Okay, seriously, I am so excited to talk about this movie. Even though it is a little bit of its time, I have to admit that it is one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm not saying it's the best movie ever. I am saying that it's a cinematic masterpiece. Let me just say up front that if you care about spoilers for this literally 20-year-old movie, then I guess you might want to go because I am going to be going through the entire plot of the movie. But I will also say that if you hear all the plot of this movie, it's still a very enjoyable experience to watch anyways. So think about staying maybe. And in the spirit of one of my favorite YouTubers of all time, I have made this into an internet friendly numbered list. Thank you so much, Jenny Nicholson. Number one, little introduction. This is going to date me, but I actually saw this movie in theaters when it came out. I was a little preteen, and I was with my best friend at the time and her parents, and this movie blew our tiny little minds. You have to understand that this was pre-superhero renaissance, so we basically just had the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and the original X-Men movies and the Ben Affleck Daredevil. Does anyone else remember the Ben Affleck Daredevil? Because I sure do, and child me was definitely really into that. Adult me, not so much. Actually, just a quick tangent on that note. Even though geek culture was nothing back then like it is today, there was this odd boom right around the time of this movie coming out that there was a lot of adaptations of adult graphic novels. Along with Constantine in 2005, there was also V for Vendetta and Sin City. The year before, there was Hellboy. 2006 brought us 300. 2007 brought us 30 Days of Night. And 2009, of course, brought us Watchmen. And actually, on a tangent, when I first saw Constantine, I actually had no idea it was based on a graphic novel. Like I said, I was just a preteen and I certainly wasn't exposed to anything like that. So I thought it was completely original. Therefore, I will not be basing any of this on the graphic novel. I will not be making comparisons. I am only looking at the movie Constantine on its own merits. And what a masterpiece this movie is. I'm also going to go ahead and give the content warning right up front. There is a lot of heavy topics in this movie, specifically the topics of self harm that results in death. I mean, there's nothing overly graphic. You don't have to worry about seeing guts. There's a little blood, but it's not a horror movie by any means. However, you will know what's happening. And there is also some addiction as well in the movie, specifically to do with alcohol and nicotine. Part two, the movie plot overview. The movie opens with a panning shot of a desert labeled Mexico, just Mexico. We then see two dirty, disheveled looking men digging around in some ruins. It's a little unclear, as one of the men is rooting through stuff looking for valuable objects. His foot breaks through some wooden planks and he finds a secret compartment. When he pulls out what's inside, it's a red bundle of fabric that when he unwraps it turns out to be the flag of a certain ruling party of Germany during World War II that or Axis powers. Sorry, I don't know what I can say on YouTube. And look, I'm not actually going to go into why they use that iconography because it's the first and last time we ever see it in the movie. Anyways, wrapped inside the flag is a golden spearhead, and as soon as the man touches it, he begins acting very strange and jittery, paranoid. Uh, we hear whispering in the background. They don't actually explain this right here or at all, actually, but I'm just going to bring it up because I believe you can infer based on information later in the movie that whenever someone begins hearing all those whispering voices, it basically means that there are demons nearby. So it's pretty obvious that this guy's possessed. However, I've actually never been able to tell if he was possessed by the spear or if it was something else, like a demon possessing him to try to get the spear. And we'll come back to this later, but it's just something that I personally haven't quite figured out. Hey, we get our first jump scare of the movie when the man holding the spearhead billowing smoke, and the guy who was with him runs over. But as the camera pans around, what we see is that the guy is just still standing right where he was, bent over the car. And the car is just smashed in. It's completely bent around him as if he were a lamppost. Then the camera zooms in on his bare forearm, and we see that a scar or a brand magically appears. All of a sudden, he just jumps up on top of the car, completely unhurt, and takes off running into the desert. Cut to a middle-aged woman in a cramped apartment making tea. It's not clarified, but at this point we can pretty much assume that we're in the States. Anyway, the woman brings the tea to her sick daughter, but when she cracks the door, she suddenly falls backwards. The tea goes clattering, and when the camera pans up, we see the daughter is not so much sick. She is definitely possessed and is on the ceiling like a bug, exorcist style. Actually, did that happen in The Exorcist? I haven't actually ever seen that movie, so I'm sorry if that doesn't actually happen, but you know what I mean. Smash cut to our sexy protagonist, John Constantine, of course, played by Keanu Reeves, who is very sexy also. There's this reoccurring visual that I really love of Constantine pulling a cigarette out of the pack, putting it between his lips, flicking the Zippo lighter open to light his cigarette, and then flicking it closed. I just think it's a cool shot, and also I enjoy how the idea of the ritual of lighting the cigarette sort of mirrors the idea of the ritual of things like exorcism. Next, Constantine meets with a very nervous-looking priest who, through visual cues like a flask stored in his robes, we learn is an alcoholic. This character's name is Father Hennessy. Get it? Get it? Hennessy. Alcohol. Anyways, so Father Hennessy says he has a job for John, and they go to the apartment of the woman with the possessed daughter. There's another awesome cigarette visual that I really enjoy in this scene where Constantine takes the cigarette out of his mouth, still burning, and balances it on the end table, I think. Anyways, it's just leaving the still lit cigarette with just the tiniest plume of smoke as he goes to do this job. Like he's gonna finish before the cigarette burns out. I'll come back to it, but the idea of the cigarette mirroring John's position in life and death for that matter, in sort of an in-between stage, I think is represented well by the half-smoked cigarette being left burning on the table. This is also where we get to hear his catchphrase for the first time as he introduces himself to the demon inside the girl.
This is Constantine. John Constantine. Asshole.
I think everybody should introduce themselves that way. He performs what seems like a fairly routine exorcism, talisman, sunlight, chanting, all that stuff. But something doesn't seem quite right. And when he bends down to listen to see if the girl is still breathing, we get our second jump scare of the movie when a demon mouth kind of pushes out from underneath the skin. Like it doesn't come through, but you can see the mouth under the skin, teeth chomping. Anyways, Constantine just punches that girl right in the neck to Shia LaBeouf. Yes, Shia LaBeouf was Chaz Kramer, Constantine's, well, We can again infer by the commission taxi he's driving that he's John's assistant. When we meet Chaz, he's actually practicing his own version of Constantine's catchphrase, but with his name.
This is Kramer. Chaz Kramer, asshole.
Anyway, this is really just to introduce the Chaz character. Back inside, there is a really cool scene where Constantine asks the family for a mirror and they rig up this full length mirror up onto the ceiling with ropes. And Constantine manages to draw the demon to the surface, I guess, if you will. And then he tricks it into looking in the mirror. And once it does that, the demon becomes trapped inside the mirror, sort of a general Zod type of thing. Anyways, they use the rigged rope to toss that mirror right out the window and it smashes on the floor, destroying the demon, leaving the girl healthy and safe. However, right before Constantine leaves the apartment, he walks past a bunch of children's drawings pinned up on the wall, and he sees one that is very obviously the spear that we saw right at the very beginning of the movie. So he just takes that. Outside the apartment, Constantine tells Father Hennessy that he thinks that this kind of possession wasn't normal, that he thinks something weird is going on. He asks if Father Hennessy will listen to the ether and takes off the talisman necklace that he was wearing. While the father seems very reluctant to give up the talisman, he does eventually agree. Now we meet our second protagonist, Rachel Weisz. I mean, Angela. Get it? Angela, like Angel. Uh, 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 yeah, they did. She's in a church confessional where we find out she's a cop. And she's confessing to the sin of murder as she has shot and killed yet another criminal. We find out through this confession that she always seems to know where the criminals are, and she goes on about how, most cops go their whole career with never shooting their guns, but why do I always seem to know exactly where they are and exactly where to shoot? Smash cut to also Rachel Weisz. I mean, Rachel Weisz playing Angela's twin sister, Isabel. She sits up abruptly in a hospital bed in a panic, and we follow her out of her room as she sneaks down the hallway onto the roof. When she gets up to the ledge, she looks back at the camera, removes her medical bracelet, lets it go into the wind, and then jumps off the roof. There is a lot of religious imagery here. First of all, as she's falling, we see that on the side of the hospital there is a massive cross. Second of all, Isabel holds the crucifixion pose the entire way down until she smashes through a glass roof into a pool of water. Now we cut back to Constantine, who is in the doctor's office being shown some x rays of his lungs that are absolutely full of cancer. Unsurprising, but still, a bummer. He's saying, "You saved me once before, you can save me again." He's trying to talk her into doing more surgery, and she's basically like, "No, there's nothing else I can do. There wouldn't be enough lung left. You've only got a very limited time." Constantine's response is then to do his little Zippo lighting a cigarette right there in the doctor's office, right in front of her. And I just find this hilarious. I think it's a delightful little character moment. We cut back to Angela, who is now arriving at the scene of her sister's death. The detectives there are telling her it was a self-inflicted jump, that she chose to do it. Angela completely disagrees. She says that Isabel was a Catholic, a devout Catholic, who knew that this kind of action would result in going to hell. So somebody must have pushed her, or somebody must have convinced her to jump. But the detectives say no, and that they have security footage. There's a really creepy scene of Rachel Weisz, Angela, examining what effectively looks like her own dead body. Obviously, in real life, she is bending over the dead body on the floor, but the way that the camera shoots it is it tilts them both upright. So it's as if She's nose to nose with her own corpse. Super freaky. Obviously, Angela is distraught. She leaves. We see her walking down the hallway towards the elevators, and then we see Constantine getting into the elevators. So they've been in the same place this whole time. She calls for them to hold the elevator door, but Constantine very rudely and intentionally lets it shut right in her face.
Hold the door. You going down?
Not if I can help it.
Now we come upon another very creepy visual, which is the Mexican man earlier still clutching the spear, walking through a field of cattle. As he passes the cows, they fall over and sort of dry up dead. And so the further he walks, the more and more cattle fall down dead. And it's just, like a pestilence. Getting back to Constantine, he visits his friend who really likes bugs named Beeman. Yeah, these names are not subtle, but I still love it. And Beeman is clearly the nerdy information character, the Q character, if you will. Basically, he provides John with all the knowledge and information, and also importantly, all the relics and weapons that John uses to fight. When John mentions the possessed girl we met earlier, Beeman sort of pushes back and says, we're not doorways. They can't just come through us like that. We cut to a beautiful zoomed out shot of a church in the pouring rain, and we see Chaz's taxi pull up. We see Constantine get out to go into the church, just absolutely downpouring. And this is a literary device that we call pathetic fallacy. When the weather matches the protagonist's mood or mindset, we call that pathetic fallacy. The more you know. Entering the church, he's greeted by a young priest, but just before he can speak, we notice that Angela has actually walked in behind him and is asking to speak to the priest that she was confessing to earlier. Constantine gives her a very snide, first come, first served. She makes a face, but luckily they aren't there to see the same person. As Angela goes off to have her conversation with the priest, Constantine approaches somebody who is standing in front of a fire, and there is an incredible shot of this person in a very nicely tailored suit standing facing away from the camera, and we see these big gray wings pop out of their back, feathers. It's just, man, this is such a beautiful movie. So this person turns out to be Gabriel, played by Tilda Swinton, and God dang it, Tilda Swinton in this movie is the absolute embodiment of androgyny. I'm sorry, I have to divert for just a moment to go on this little ramble about androgyny because not only do I personally identify as non binary, but I've always been the most attracted to people who are androgynous, to people who walk a very thin line between the masculine and feminine to the point where, again, remember, I was only like 12 or 13 when I saw this movie. So I didn't really know Tilda Swinton. And honestly, for the first time I saw this movie, I had no idea if the actor playing Gabriel was a guy or a girl. Not that it mattered, but I just think that that's really amazing and something that really only very few people could pull off. So Tilda Swinton was just immaculate casting. Anyway, getting back to the movie, John has a bit of a heated discussion with Gabriel. He argues that he's done lots of good work by sending lots of demons back to hell and, making sure that Earth is being kept in the balance, angels in heaven, demons in hell. That's the way it should be. However, Gabriel tells him that that's not how it works, that he can't buy his way into heaven. And the reason that he can't get into heaven when he dies is because of the life you took. Remember this, it's going to come up later. At the end of this interaction, Gabriel leans in real close to John's face and they're practically kissing. And I just have to divert here again because, oh my God, this movie is so gay. It is so wonderfully gay. I am absolutely going to be pointing out every single moment where this movie gets delightfully gay. And this is the first. I know that technically in real life Tilda Swinton is a woman. However, in the movie, the character of Gabriel is absolutely supposed to be non-binary. Therefore, this moment is very, very gay, and I love it. Now we cut back to visit Father Hennessy, who is sitting at a table with a whole bunch of newspapers all spread out in front of him, and his eyes rolled back, fingertips running all over the pages, and there's all that whispering again. um, it's not explained, and we'll get into this a bit later, but I believe at this point we're supposed to infer that Father Hennessy has the ability to psychically get information from other sources, whether it be newspapers or perhaps magical items or personal items. It's not fully clarified, but anyways, point is he's running his hands all over the newspapers until suddenly he stops when he hears the word whispered.
Isabel.
Getting back to Angela, she's in her apartment watching the security footage of Isabel's roof incident on a loop. And obviously, like the police officer said, she does it of her own free will. However, Angela is determined to find something, but she's beginning to doze off, and on one of the loops, when Isabel turns to look at the camera, she says the word. This obviously wakes Angela up, but when she tries to go back and look at the loop again, Isabel doesn't say anything. This leads into our next jump scare of the movie, which is just a phone ringing really loud, and then another phone and another phone. And you have to remember this was 2005, and so landlines were a thing. Having phones in multiple different rooms was a thing. Also, with Angela being a cop, she would probably have a work cell phone, potentially a personal cell phone. So there are a whole bunch of phones ringing. We cut back to Constantine, still out in the pouring rain, and he is chugging cough suppressant right from the bottle. Unfortunately, it's not working, and he ends up keeling over onto the pavement. As he's trying to recover, he's approached by somebody, and you kind of feel something is off. And it turns out to be a demon, but not just any demon, okay? This is a demon completely made up of like bugs and snakes and like sea creatures and all kinds of creepy crawlies. And yes, it's very 2000s CGI, but it's also kind of cool. I kind of love it. It's like, when he talks, the lips are made out of snake bodies. It's cool. You should watch it. Luckily, Constantine, of course, does recover, and he cartoonishly defeats the demon by tricking it out into the middle of a busy road where it is hit by a semi truck. We get the sort of joke of, the bug splattering on the windshield, except it's like all the bugs. And a strong contender for my personal favorite comic relief moment of the entire movie when Constantine is, stomping to, finish off all those awful bugs. And then he just kicks a crab, just boots it right across the street. In the next scene, we get a bit of an exposition dump via Chaz. A story with this much lore, unfortunately, can't really avoid these kinds of things. So, as Chaz and John are walking to their destination, John keeps insisting that it's just a bar, it's just a bar. However, Chaz seems to know that it's owned by somebody named Papa Midnight. And Papa Midnight, according to Chaz, is someone who used to do the same kind of work as Constantine, but who is now a crusader for good who swore the oath of neutrality. Yeah, again, it's not super well explained, but I'll try to piece it together for you as we go. I just want to say here, even though I am biased because I love Keanu Reeves, I think he was a really good fit for this role, and I love how he delivers all his little quippy remarks because that's very much in the nature Constantine character. He sort of reminds me a lot of Dean from Supernatural. Basically, when they arrive at the bar, John tells Chaz, "You can get in if you can get in." What he means by this is when you go inside the bar, there's a bouncer holding a hero looking card, obviously picture facing him. And if you tell him what picture is on the card, you can get in. Again, not explained, but I don't think we need it explained. Basically, if you have psychic powers of some kind, you can get into the bar. There's a kind of cool long tracking shot that follows John as he weaves through the bar, and all the patrons have, that old vintage camera red eye effect. No, they just have a red reflection in their eyes, which I assume is to symbolize that they're all demons. When he finally arrives in Midnight's office, we see that it is decorated floor to ceiling with relics and religious artifacts. Clearly, this is somebody important. At least that was my impression. However, we get such little screen time with Papa Midnight for such an interesting character. It sort of bums me out. But getting back to the plot, get a really nice, simple exchange between him and John that establishes their relationship right away. Basically, Papa Midnight makes a comment about John selling him a forgery. John says, I thought the thing was real. And we kind of get an idea of their frenemyship. There is one line in this interaction I just like to point out because it comes up later. Midnight tells Constantine regarding the devil,
You're the one soul he'd come up here himself to collect.
much like his conversation with Beeman when Constantine tries to tell Midnight about the possessed girl and the bug demon and how he thinks something is really wrong. Midnight kind of dismisses him. He gives the same answer, angels in heaven, demons in hell. That's the rule. Here is where we meet Balthazar, played by Bush frontman Gavin Rosdale. Oh man, do we forget another super homoerotic moment between him and Constantine. Not only does he lean close enough to John's face to kiss him, but he also does a very lewd finger sucking move. It's like, guys, the movie, I just, it's, guys, so good. Sadly, no gay kiss, so we move on. We follow John back to his apartment. We get a shot of John's sort of sad, sparse apartment, and he's sitting at his old kitchen table smoking, obviously, when he sees a spider running across the table. And he grabs a glass and traps it, then takes a drag of his cigarette, lifts the edge of the glass, blows the smoke underneath, lets it back down, and tells the spider,
Welcome to my life.
I think this is another really important characterization moment. Then Rachel Weisz, Angela, follows John to his apartment and he doesn't want to let her in. She flashes her badge and he kind of rolls his eyes and agrees. Angela admits that she doesn't even really know what she's doing there, but she wanted to talk about her sister's death. Constantine remains very hostile towards her. In fact, he basically mocks her about the whole going to hell, being in hell thing. But Angela insists that right at the very end, before Isabel died, that she was getting paranoid and muttering constantly about angels and demons. And she knows that Constantine is the person to talk to about that. He's very unsympathetic. So unsympathetic, in fact, that when she says, I was hoping you could point me in the right direction, he says,
Sure.
obviously, Angela is very upset by this, but just as she's storming out of the apartment, she lifts up the glass and lets the spider free. I think this is a good characterization moment for her, and also kind of is a good show don't tell moment of how she and Constantine are foil characters for each other. Of course, immediately after she leaves, John sees a bunch of demons flying past the window. And honestly, this is probably the laziest scene in the movie. I have all kinds of praise, but this scene, oof, Basically, he's got a curtain drawn, and behind the curtain, you can see the shadows of all these demons flying by, but they look sort of like flying monkeys, and the animation, it's not good. I don't want to tear it apart too bad, but it's definitely not getting the effect of the rest of the movie. So, being the hero that he obviously is, even if he doesn't want to admit it, Constantine runs outside to catch up with Angela, and when he catches her, there is an awesome shot of all the streetlights going out one by one, first from one direction, then the other, slowly closing in on them until the very last light that they've retreated back into is in the window of a pawn shop, and it's a big statue of the Virgin Mary. This is immediately followed by another really cool shot where, right before it goes completely dark, we kind of see Constantine wrapping something around his hand. And then when it goes fully black, you just hear the click of the Zippo, and then woo, his hand has turned into some kind of holy beacon, and it incinerates every single one of those winged demons. So now that Angela has seen some proof, they decide to go to her apartment so Constantine can prove that Isabel is in hell. When they get there, he asks to go through Isabel's stuff and discovers that the cat belonged to Isabel. And he says that cats are a good thing because they're half in, half out anyway, implying spirit. And as he's getting ready for this ritual, Angela is kind of gently mocking him, asking if he needs candles or pentagrams, that kind of stuff.
Don't you need candles and a pentagram for it to work?
Why, do you have any?
I just think it's a cute moment. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the rituals and stuff that John does later, but basically at that point is he can teleport to hell. Now he's in hell. Even though that bug demon from earlier was pretty 2000 CGI, the minion demons in hell actually look amazing. They're very creepy, very cool. Clearly, a lot of the movie's budget must have gone to designing the minion demons because, like, they're awesome. The minion demons seem to be sniffing Constantine out as he looks for Isabel, and as soon as he spots her, he starts running. They're chasing him, and just as they're about to bear down on him, he catches that medical bracelet that she had taken off earlier and smashes a vial of holy water on his chest, which I guess brings him back. Again, we're going to talk about it a bit later. Now we go back to Father Hennessy, who is in the morgue looking at Isabel's dead body. And of course, one of the things he uncovers is that mark on her inner wrist, the brand that matched the mark on the Mexican man from the very beginning of the movie. When he touches the symbol on her arm, he recoils, and then all of a sudden he seems to start having a panic attack, and he pulls out his flask. He tries to drink from it, but it seems to be empty, and this only makes him panic more. Father Hennessy runs out of the morgue. He runs into a store and just begins pulling bottles out of the fridges, trying to drink, obviously going through withdrawal. And no matter what bottles he pulls out, no matter if he opens them or smashes them open, nothing will come out of the bottles. However, anytime he puts a bottle down or knocks it over, you can see the liquid spilling out just fine. And that's when we see Balthazar standing over in the corner of the store, casually eating some beef jerky or something. And suddenly it's very clear why Father Hennessy can't seem to get a drink. I'm sure most of you know this, but abrupt withdrawal from any addiction can actually be serious enough to cause death in some cases. So you really have to be careful. And in this case, Father Hennessy is choking and coughing. He thinks he's dying. He collapses, and in the last moments of his life, he grabs a corkscrew, and this is painful to watch, but you don't see anything. He begins stabbing the corkscrew into his hand, clearly trying to leave a message. And suddenly there's a cut, and you look back at Father Hennessy, and alcohol is pouring out of his mouth. He's choking and sputtering. He actually has been drinking the whole time, and he drank himself to death. At this point, we get another exposition dump. Like I said, it's pretty unavoidable, but this one is fairly well executed, especially because it's cutting back and forth between Constantine and Angela and Balthazar and the shopkeeper who's revealed to have angel like this. Basically, John is explaining his past. He explains how when he was a child, he could see things that people weren't supposed to be able to see, but nobody believed him, especially not his parents. They thought he was crazy. They sent him away. They put him on antipsychotics and ultimately had him electroshocked. None of this worked, of course. So John figured he was crazy, and the only solution was to take a life, his own life. So now we see what Gabriel meant when they said, "You're going to hell because of the life you took." Now, John did succeed in ending his own life, and he says he was dead for 2 minutes before he was resuscitated by the paramedics. But 2 minutes in hell is an eternity for the soul. So he's determined to not go back there. And that's why he spends all his time and energy dedicated to ridding the world of demons. So hopefully he can earn enough favor to get into heaven. I also think it's around this point that Constantine brings up the spear. He mentions it to Angela. She gets a little bit snarky about how I'm a Catholic, John. I know the crucifixion story, and basically explains how even though Jesus was crucified, he didn't die because of the crucifixion. He died because a Roman soldier stabbed him with a spear, the spear of destiny. So, just in case it's not clear, the idea is that the Romans stabbed Jesus with a spear, therefore, Jesus' blood is probably still on the spear. Remember this. And that's when they arrive at the corner store bodega that Father Hennessy died in. And I know Angela is a cop and everything, but they never explain how or why the two of them knew to go there right then. In fact, when Constantine realizes what's happened, he leans down and mutters to Father Hennessy, "Why didn't you call me?" So I don't know. That's kind of for address. Also, Angela kind of hand waves this stranger who is handling a dead body currently under investigation as Constantine grabs a handkerchief and blots off the blood on Father Hennessy's hand to reveal that he had drawn the symbol that was the mark on Isabel, the Mexican man's inner wrist, the circle with the cross. At this point, John says that he needs to see where Isabel died, so Angela takes him to the hospital room and they're looking around. There's nothing obvious. And this is where we get a little bit of a uncomfortable scene where Constantine is trying to probe Angela's memory to figure out that Isabel would have left a message that only she could find, so it would not be obvious. And this is a good idea, but as she's saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, he's getting more and more aggressive until he's basically screaming at her and shaking her violently. And it's like, okay, like, Keanu Reeves is very hot when he's angry, so like, I let it go in the movie, but like, in real life, it's kind of like, ugh. Finally, she remembers that as children, they used to leave each other messages on mirrors and windows by using their fingers to write. And then when you breathe hot breath on the window, it fogs up and reveals the message. So she does that and reveals that Isabel had written a whole bunch of stuff on the window of her hospital room. But most importantly, John points out Corinthians 17. And for those of you who know the Bible, Angela says Corinthians doesn't go to 17. That doesn't exist.
Corinthians goes to 21x in the Bible and hell.
Yeah, I mean, it's all using the mythos. I suppose it shouldn't surprise anybody that hell also uses a Bible, but they don't really touch on it after this next scene. So, okay. So, as one does in these situations, Constantine calls his nerdy friend Beeman to find out what Corinthians 17 says. Beeman pulls out this awful, gross, sticky looking black Bible and reads out the passage that they were looking for. This brings up Mammon, the son of the devil. If the name Mammon sounds familiar to you, it is the name of the demon in the movie Hereditary that the mother's mother was part of a cult that worshipped Mammon. So that definitely caught me by surprise because I don't think in that movie that they mention that he's the devil's son, but I also think that a lot of movies that use the Christian mythos take a lot of liberties with what characters and events are what and where. So the important passages from Corinthians 17 that Beeman reads are as follows. The sins of the father will only be exceeded by the sins of the son. He has no patience for his father's rule and yearns to forge his own kingdom. He would need to possess a very powerful psychic crossover. He would need the help of God. So personally, I interpret it like this. Isabel was the very powerful psychic who had been chosen to be the new body for Mammon. However, she either realized this or found out or was told by some other force, and therefore she jumped off the roof in order to prevent Mammon from using her body. It's my interpretation. Oh, and obviously, this is where the whole spear of destiny thing comes back because if Jesus' blood is on the spear and Jesus is God, then Mammon could use the blood on the spear as the help of God. Suddenly, Beeman hears something and abruptly hangs up the phone. Constantine thinks this is weird. When we come back to Beeman, he's itching and rubbing and looking paranoid. And then we see a bug crawl out from like under the skin of his eye, like out of his eye. Oh my god, it's so gross. This is probably the most troubling thing for me is I hate that stuff. But anyways, feeling like something is wrong, John and Angela run to Beeman's place, but unfortunately they're too late. And when they find him, he is covered head to toe in bugs, and they're pouring out of his mouth and eyes and ears. It's a really awful visual. Luckily, it's not on screen for too long. I only realized recently, this is embarrassing, that those bugs must be locusts. I'm pretty sure they're locusts, like one of the plagues of Egypt from the Old Testament, which I think is interesting because Jesus is New Testament. So here we have another what I feel is unnecessary cutback to the Mexican man. There isn't really anything cool in this shot. We just see him like arrive at a gas station out in the desert and then he carjacks somebody, and that's literally it. Back at Constantine's apartment, Angela finally confesses to him that she used to have psychic powers, but pretended that she didn't because when they were children, her and Isabel both could see things, but while Isabel admitted it and was called crazy, Angela lied and said she couldn't, and that's sort of why she feels extra guilty about Isabel's death because she was the one who pretended like all that stuff wasn't real while her sister was honestly put through a very similar thing as Constantine, going on antipsychotics and being hospitalized. Of course, John responds to this by saying that denial is the only reason why she's still alive, and if she sticks around him, that's going to change. But she insists that she's ready to see things the way they are and asks John to show her hell. He kind of reluctantly agrees to give her the crash course. So, to do this crash course, Constantine is running a bath because Angela needs to be fully submerged. It's a whole thing I'll get to in a second, but there is a fantastic exchange here.
So do I have to take the rest of my clothes off or can I leave them on? John,
I'm thinking.
John,
Oh, it's fine.
So she gets in the bathtub and she gets underwater, and John is holding her there. And there's this great moment where, the camera is dramatically zooming in on Angela's face as she's underwater and she's holding her breath. And there's a big swell of that suspenseful music, and then nothing. Angela opens her eyes and she's just like underwater, but nothing's happening, nothing's happening. And then she starts to run out of breath. She tries to sit up. John holds her underneath. She starts to thrash. John holds her underneath. This is the crash course. So I don't think I need to go into the whole like how people go to hell thing. It's not really important. The point is that when he finally lets her up, she thrashes so hard she breaks the bathtub. They are both in white shirts, soaking wet. It's awesome. Thank you very much, director. Excellent call. Now, having just found out that hell is real, Angela is obviously freaking out and she's muttering to herself, the kind of stuff she was saying in the confessional where I always knew where they were, I always knew where to shoot. She's muttering to herself, oh, I always knew, I always knew. And then suddenly she goes into a bit of a trance, I guess, a psychic trance, if you will. And she realizes that someone's been in the apartment. And then she just takes off running. And she runs all the way up to where Beeman died in the room full of relics. And she, in this sort of blank stare trance, reaches down into the grated floor and pulls out coin. Oh, did I forget to mention that in the previous two scenes we saw Balthazar, he has a big silver coin that he flips between his fingers, in that way that like loan sharks or mobsters do. I'm sorry. He has a big coin that he's always carrying, and that's what Angela finds. I'm sorry I forgot to mention it. It's just not really that important ultimately. So obviously they gear up with relics to go meet Gavin Rossdale. I mean Balthazar. So John and Angela arrive at some big office building. I guess they know that's where Balthazar is. Again, it's not really explained. So first John attacks Balthazar with fire, but that doesn't work. So instead he splashes some holy water on him, and that burns away a bunch of one side of his face, revealing that underneath his skin is very much like the minion demon's, sort of wet, gross.
That's better. Au natural.
Holy crap, did I only just now realize after watching this movie like 100 times that Balthazar must be an homage to Batman's Two-Face? I mean, the coin was already one thing, but John literally burns half his face, like with the teeth and huh, huh. I mean, I guess it was a graphic novel, so it makes sense, but man, how did I only just realize that? For shame. Anywho, John puts on some blessed brass knuckles, which personally I love the idea of, and then just beats the absolute crap out of Balthazar to blackmail him in order to get more information. John pulls out a Bible, he pulls out some holy water and I think a rosary maybe, and says he's going to send Balthazar backing up to heaven, and heaven's not a particularly friendly place for demons. Obviously, Balthazar doesn't want this. He's whimpering, he's pleading. John starts chanting and making the sign of the cross, and finally Balthazar gives in and he says, fine, fine, fine. And then finally admits
Whatever killed the Son of God will give birth to the Son of the Devil.
this admission. Constantine thanks him, puts the Bible away, and says,
By the way, you have to ask for absolution to be forgiven. Asshole.
so, oh, it's just, of course, Balthazar is still all smug as John's leaving, so he turns around and hits him with, I guess, the special fire gun that Beeman gave him earlier in the movie. Point is, Balthazar is blown to pieces. After John leaves the room, we cut back to Balthazar and see his suit is lying in a kind of a pile of ash. And then pieces of his face are lying all over the table. And it's a really cool effect that they do where, his eyes are still looking back and forth, but the chunks of his face are, in different places. And his mouth is actually broken in two. But when he talks, like both sides of his mouth move in sync, even though it's all apart. Anyways, I just think it's a very cool effect. Then someone not revealed to the audience comes in to see Balthazar. He clearly expects to be put back together, but there's a very heavy wind of some kind. We'll get back to it. And he's blown away. Angela, against Constantine's instructions, did not stay in the car, and so he runs into her in the hallway. He's like, "We gotta go." And all of a sudden, she starts to feel weird, and then boom, she is kidnapped by an invisible force, and we get another just incredible series of shots. Basically, the idea of what's happening in the scene is that something is blowing holes in the walls of this office building. So you have to think, rooms beside rooms beside rooms, and each wall is getting a big hole blown in it. And Angela is getting sucked through the holes as they're being blown in the walls. And John is running after Angela. So the building is shot from side angle as if you would chop the building in half this way. And you get to see, Angela fly through the screen and then John jump through the screen and jumping over elevator shafts and whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Unfortunately, she is eventually sucked all the way outside and vanishes into the sky. So at this point, the stakes are high, and Constantine is done playing. He has Chaz take him to Pop at Midnight, and instead of dealing with the bouncer, he just punches him in the face, allowing Chaz to follow him in. He kicks down the door to Midnight's office, which makes Midnight furious, obviously. Midnight chastises him and tells him to respect the balance. John says, "Screw the balance." And this really angers Midnight. I'm not entirely sure what Papa Midnight's powers are. He shoves John against the wall and then shoves his fingers like up under his ribs, but they seem to actually go like inside his body, and you hear this awful sizzling sound like they're burning. And John is obviously in a lot of pain, just arguing back and forth about the balance for a few moments until eventually Midnight relents. They are friends. And on that note, Midnight says, "Tell me this isn't about the girl." John replies, "Definitely, mostly not about the girl." Now that that's taken care of, John insists on using the chair. Midnight takes him into a back room, even more filled with relics and artifacts. And there is, I guess, an old electric chair is what it looks like. So I guess between the chair and Midnight's magic, John is able to have some kind of vision where he sees the Mexican man find the spear and sort of follows him through all the shots of the movie that we've seen until he suddenly attacked by an unseen force. Someone starts choking him and he calls and Midnight yanks him out of the vision. This is completely unexplained, so just take it at face value. As John and Midnight are talking about how they should deal with this situation, Chaz starts throwing out ideas and reveals himself to have been studying what Constantine does this whole time and actually has a huge wealth of information that he can use to fight both half-breeds and demons. Smash cut to Angela falling out of the sky through that opening that Isabel made in the ceiling right into the pool. She stands up, she draws her gun. Do guns work if they've been fully submerged in water? Somebody tell me. The Mexican man really creepily rises out of the water just behind Angela, and she spins around and she fires a bunch of bullets into him, but he's totally impervious. In fact, there's red spots that just disappear after a second. Cut back to John and Chaz. They get to the hotel, they split up. Chaz runs to the water tank and, with an enchanted cross from Pop Midnight, basically blesses the entire water supply of the hospital. On his way to Angela, Constantine runs into a huge group of people with that old vintage camera red eye effect. So I guess demons. To deal with the demons, he pulls out a chair, stands on it, lights his Zippo, sets off the fire alarm, and when the sprinklers open, it's full of holy water while the demons start screaming and melting, and it's kind of cool. Cut back to Angela. She is not doing well. The Mexican man has overpowered her, succeeds in drowning her, and we get a very cool pool transition into hell. That's when Angela meets Manton. And oh boy, Mammons not great. Like, seriously, it's really disappointing because all the minion demons look so good and so scary. And then Balthazar had that super gross demon skin under his human skin. But Mammon, he's just like a mildly spooky skeleton CGI man. It's not even an actor, it's fully CGI. It looks bad. Anyway, cut back to Constantine. He jumps in the pool to try to save Angela, but it's too late. She is already possessed by Mammon, and she kind of reminds me of the vampires from Buffy when they go all vampire and they get that like super heavy forehead. It's, I guess, a way to make her look more possessed. Anyways, as a result of being possessed, Angela's body now has super strength, and John almost gets himself drowned before Chaz manages to save him. They together pull Angela's body from the pool. They begin reciting some incantations, and it really seems like the exorcism is going to work. Angela's face goes back to normal, and she starts to wake up, and all of a sudden she starts feeling her stomach, and boom, again, we get that super creepy visual of like a demon mouth under the skin, like chomp, chomp, chomp. We get another sweet moment of John being proud of Chaz as he remembers the right incantation to start saying, and then they chant it together and chant it together, and it seems to work. And then, just as Chaz leans down to do his version of the
This is Kramer. Chaz Kramer.
line, he is grabbed by an invisible force. And I'm not gonna lie, this part is pretty upsetting. Basically, Chaz is pulled like a rag doll into the air and then smashed badly between the floor and ceiling. And it's all tile, so it's like bang, 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 and oh, it's hard to watch. But unfortunately, I do feel like the moment is kind of undermined by what follows. See, I forgot to mention this earlier, but the first time that John and Chaz show up at Papa Midnight's, Chaz is kind of bugging John about when he'll get to finally go on an actual job with him. And John is pretty reluctant and tells him it's not like the movies. So after Chaz is smashed and drops violently to the floor in a big crater of tile, it should be emotional, especially with Chaz like coughing and choking on blood, and he mutters,
No, it isn't.
and then Chaz dies, which again would probably be really sad and moving if they didn't just never show him again. Seriously, they just like, yeah, Keanu Reeves is sad for like a second, but then he has like the rest of the movie to deal with, which we'll get there in a moment. Like, seriously, Chaz has this super tragic death, and I know he didn't get a lot of screen time, but he seemed like kind of before Angela John's only soft spot. Then he's just completely gone from the movie from this point forward. Not even a gravestone or anything. What? Anyway, this seems to be the last straw for John, and he makes a decision to do something. He has these tattoos on both sides of his forearms that I guess if you put them together, they would make like a summoning circle. But as he's trying to push them together, Gabriel shows up with wings, flutters down and kind of kicks him over. And I actually can't figure out if, you know what? No, I'm going to come back to this. Let me just get through the rest of the plot of the movie. So, Gabriel appears in the most amazing androgynous outfit. Seriously, I was obsessed with this outfit. I drew pictures of it for ages after seeing this movie for the first time. Then, for whatever reason, after knocking John down, Gabriel puts their foot on his face. Not just like holds it there, but kind of like lightly rubs it against his face, and even if it's not gay, I mean, I'm not saying that foot fetishes are gay. Those can apply to anyone, but I'm just saying if it's not gay, it's at the very least very sexual. If you're not convinced by that, there is yet another shot of them.
It's not fair.
It's not obvious, okay. So if you haven't figured it out yet, Gabriel is the one who is helping Mammon break free of hell. The reason for this that Gabriel gives to John is that they are jealous of humans. Basically, they hate that God gives everything to humanity. He gives them free will and they can do anything they want. And all they have to do in the end is repent and they will be welcomed into his bosom. He will forgive them for absolutely anything and love them unconditionally. Only man gets to make this claim. Gabriel hates that. So, Gabriel has taken upon themselves that if humans are deemed so worthy of God's love, then Gabriel will make humans worthy of God's love. So, ready to execute the plan, Gabriel sends John flying into the next room and then leans over Angela's body, ready to start the ritual. Meanwhile, John tries to ask God for help, but gets no reply, so he decides, fine, he'll go the other way. And again, content warning, takes some broken glass and cuts himself on the inner forearms and slowly begins to bleed out. Constantine is slowly dying. Gabriel's in the other room with a spear, and they're about to plunge it into Angela's stomach to free Mammon, and then all of a sudden, time stops. And then we see a very greasy, skeevy, rat-like man enter the frame, and he's dressed in an all-white suit and bare feet for some reason. John addresses this man as Lou, which I think is just delightful. But Lou does indeed repeat what Midnight said earlier in the movie.
You're the one soul I would come up here to collect myself.
So, as sort of a last act, John wants to smoke a cigarette, but because of the cuts on his arms, he can't actually get the strength to light the Zippo. So, Lucifer gets down on the ground and helps him light it, and then starts his little villain monologue. Now, during this scene, Constantine is sat on the floor, sort of propped up against the wall, and Lucifer is sitting across from him in like a folding chair. And as he's delivering this monologue with one of his bare feet, by the way, he nudges John's legs apart, like puts his foot on the inner part of John's thigh and kind of just like nudge, nudge. And nothing comes of it. But guys, it's so gay. This movie is so gay. To get even gayer about it, Lou ends up getting mad and gets real close to John's face. And in fact, like almost goes to bite him. At the end, he just sort of sticks out his tongue and practically licks Constantine's face. Seriously, why is this movie so gay and no one talks about it? This is a gay icon of a movie. Anyway, John gives Lucifer the heads up that Gabriel and Mammon are just over there in the next room and they're plotting to overthrow the earth. So, that's going to incur God's wrath. So maybe, go check on that. And even though Lou is kind of like, whatever, he goes to have a look. Awesome visual of Lucifer blasting these glass doors apart to walk through them. But because the room is still in slow motion, like bullet time, all these little fragments and shards of glass are just suspended in the air, almost like a snowstorm. It's just this movie is full of awesome shots. People are way too hard on it. So, right as time begins to go back to normal, Lucifer grabs Angela's body and pulls it out from under Gabriel, resulting in Gabriel stabbing just the floor. Gabriel is startled, if not a little frightened, by Lucifer's sudden appearance and suddenly begins calling him names. All the incels just bounce off Lucifer. Obviously, he's the devil. What can you call him? Here's another incredibly cool effect where you see Lucifer holding Angela's unconscious body, but in the reflection of the tile floor, you see that instead of Angela's body, it's actually the CGI skeleton man, being Mammon, struggling hard against his father's grasp. And he just easily sends Mammon back. Once Lucifer has dealt with Mammon, Gabriel gets all tough and says, I will smite thee, and tries to strike him, but nothing happens. And Lucifer goes.
Looks like somebody doesn't have your back anymore.
So then Lucifer blasts Gabriel with hellfire and it completely incinerates their wings off. and sends them flying backwards into the pool. With all that done, Lou very nonchalantly walks back to Constantine, where he is barely conscious, and he's like, okay, I guess you helped me. What do you want? Do you want an extension? You want to live longer? And Constantine is like, no. I want you to set Isabel free. Let Isabel go to heaven. Let her go home. And Lou is like, okay, whatever, loser. And makes it so. Whistling a happy tune, Lucifer grabs John and begins dragging him along the floor. But after a few steps, it starts getting harder and harder, and eventually, the tile floor begins to buckle under the weight of John's body, and then suddenly a blinding light appears. This is where Lucifer realizes that the sacrifice John made by allowing Isabel to go to heaven instead of taking a favor for himself is what was finally enough to fully earn his place in heaven. And this is where we get the absolute best scene of the movie, which is Constantine flipping off the devil as he ascends to heaven. Of course, Lou is furious with this and is like, no, this one belongs to me. And he grabs Constantine, rips his shirt open, then basically just shoves his hands inside John's chest and he pulls them out. They're all full of smoking black bunk cancer. He says, you will live. But as soon as Lou lets him go, he disappears, heaven disappears. John realizes that not only is he fine, there's no marks on his body, but his wrists have completely healed up as well. Then a very charred-looking Gabriel pops out of the pool and comes up to John holding the big holy Tommy gun thing he'd been using earlier and urges him to kill. Gabriel really wants to die so that they can go to heaven. Constantine acts like, yeah, of course I'm going to kill you. But then instead of shooting, just punches Gabriel really hard in the face and gives them their first taste of pain. In the closing scene of the movie, John and Angela are out on a rooftop in the moonlight, and John hands Angela a wrapped up bundle of fabric, which of course contains the Spear of Destiny. And he tells her that she has to hide it somewhere no one can find it, not even him. And then, right here, we have our third or fourth John Angela kiss fake out, where they sort of lean like they're about to have a kiss, but then one of them turns or it's something else. And there is, in fact, no John Angela kiss in this entire movie. Therefore, proving its gayness. And then right at the very end, there is this extremely out of place voiceover narration, like one of those after school special wrap up voiceovers that's like, and then I realized that the real treasure was friends all. I mean, that's not what he says, but it's sort of one of those. And I'm guessing this is because the story came from a graphic novel, and so there was probably like important text to go there. But the rest of the movie doesn't have any voiceover narration, so this is just a really weird note to end on. However, I will say that I absolutely adore the very final shot, which is of him looking like he's about to pull out a cigarette, but then instead pops a piece of nicotine gum. Okay, number 3. Things I really love about this movie. And okay, I know throughout the whole plot description, I've been going over all the things I love, but I'm just going to give you a quick little breakdown of some of the elements I haven't talked about yet. First and foremost, the soundtrack. Oh my gosh, this movie has an amazing soundtrack that has a really early 2000s alt rock vibe. But when I looked it up, actually turns out that it has a completely original score. So I highly recommend you check it out if you like bands like Korn, Rage Against the Machine, that kind of stuff. Second of all, the actors. Okay, so like this would have been post Matrix peak Keanu Reeves fame. And he gave 1,000% to this movie. In fact, all the actors did. And there are pretty big names in here. Go on a little bit of a tangent. The thing is, in my opinion, part of the reason why so many comic book and video game movies fail is because the source material they're based on is objectively odd. It's usually not something that a lot of people are familiar with, or if it is, they have a lot of preconceived notions about it. So, what ends up happening is that you get actors who are maybe uncomfortable, unfamiliar, hesitant, and it shows in the acting. You might even have directors, producers. Hell, the wrong casting director can make or break a movie. So I think that whoever cast and directed and did anything that appears on screen, they committed to telling this story and telling it well. And if you take it seriously and all your actors or all your crew take it seriously, you're basically guaranteed to have a great movie. It doesn't matter what the subject is. And just speaking of Keanu Reeves, this was actually my first exposure to Keanu Reeves because, like I said, I think I was around 12 when I saw this movie. So I hadn't seen a lot of his earlier stuff. I didn't know that he was a teen star. And so I was instantly in love. Just little baby goth me absolutely falling head over heels in love with Keanu Reeves. But he'd been just slightly edged out by Rachel Weisz, who I'd fallen in love with the year before after seeing The Mummy, which is another just masterpiece of a movie. Should I make another video about The Mummy? Because I would love to talk about that movie. That's another one of my favorite movies ever. And by the way, that is the movie for bisexuals. Just everybody so hot, top to bottom. It's incredible. Boys, girls, oh, just the best movie for bisexuals. Okay, I have to stop. And finally, I just personally really love the way heaven and hell are depicted in this movie. They're not even that original. I just think it's really cool to have the idea of like Earth the way it is, but like completely wrecked and torn down for hell, and then completely perfect and glowing and everlit for heaven. I just think that's pretty neat. Number four, flaws that I guess I have to acknowledge. So I mentioned a few times throughout the plot description that like I'm gonna come back to this or they never explain this. So here are all the things that I said I was gonna come back to. I hope. My first grievance is that there were no gay kisses. Zero gay kisses. Boo. Next, I kind of mentioned this already, but the exposition is a little heavy-handed. I personally love a really lore-heavy world, so I'm okay with this, but it does bring the movie up to a 2-hour runtime, and I understand that a lot of people have trouble with like huge amounts of exposition being dumped on them at once. This next point is actually going to cover a few things, which is basically that none of John's powers are really explained at all, and like, yeah, you can basically infer or like they're implying a lot of the stuff and you can kind of get it. But like his tattoos, for example, the thing where he's trying to make the sigil with the like, did Gabriel interrupt him from summoning something, or was he summoning Gabriel? Because I don't know why he would be summoning Gabriel in that moment, because it kind of seems like Gabriel was only there to screw with him. Anyway, yeah, it's just like they don't really ever touch on how he does anything, and I don't really think it takes too much away from the movie, but if you're one of those people who likes explanations, you are going to be left wanting with this movie for sure. And speaking of poorly explained powers, I want more Papa Midnight. I said this already. I just think that for such a cool character, he should have been on screen more. I know that the movie is about Constantine, but still, he was awesome. Yeah, this is something else I mentioned, but it just really feels like they could have tried a lot harder with Mammon. Like, why did only Lucifer and Balthazar have bodies, but not Mammon? Like, I get that the idea was that he had to possess a body, but in that case, why did Balthazar have a body and then under the body was the demon? Because, like, that doesn't seem like a possession to me. That seems like Balthazar just had a human skin. So, well, anyways, it would have been fine if just Lucifer had a body that was human and everyone else was CGI demons, but it just really threw me that Balthazar had a body. Mammon was just like a super lazy CGI skeleton man. And lastly, look, there were lots of things that weren't explained, but I would just like to know why they portrayed Gabriel as a half-breed. John refers to them as a half-breed. They're clearly stuck on Earth. But if my Christianity mythos isn't incorrect, isn't Gabriel an archangel that plays the trumpet? It sounds the apocalypse or the rapture. I should probably look it up. Maybe someone could tell me in the comments instead. Anyways, those are my gripes. It's not a long list, but I had to say them to be fair. Number five, conclusion. This movie Constantine 2005 is amazing and super gay, and I love it. The end.